traditional naturopathic and Chinese medicine patterns and treatments based on the needs of the individual. She supports patients with a wide variety of conditions, from autoimmune diseases to anxiety and back pain. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree in science from McGill University and dual degrees in naturopathic medicine and classical Chinese medicine, which I love, from the National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon, really good school. Prior to medicine, she was a professional geologist, and no wonder you live up here, because we're known for our geology up here, magical geology, and worked on various human health and ecological risk assessments of contaminated sites around the world. She currently has 3 practice locations and lives in rural Ontario on 50 acres of land, cultivating her herb gardens, keeping bees, that's amazing, and enjoying the outdoor lifestyle. So I am going to close off my video and my mic. We're going to leave room for questions, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions at the end, and hope you all enjoy. So thanks, Sandy. You can take it away.
Great. Thanks, Madeline. Awesome. So yeah, like Madeline said, I was scheduled to actually give a bunch of talks this month. So unfortunately, I won't be able to see everyone in person like usual. But I am using this opportunity to do a lot more research and to bring a wider variety of talks in the future. So some things that have been piquing my interest is using color as healing therapy, working with biography, and doing a lot more with nutrition, which is what I've typically been talking about there. So not just, knitting and playing with my bees in my spare time. So I'm just going to switch screens here so that you can actually see the PowerPoint. I'm just going to get us into slideshow. So hopefully you can see that okay. I don't have any disclosures, no conflicts of interest. I'm not trying to sell you guys anything. I'm also not going to spend any time talking about the potential etiology or origin of this illness. I know a lot of stuff has been flying around online and whatnot, and I'm just going to keep it to naturopathic approaches, how we can support ourselves before getting sick, if we are sick, and what recovery looks like, and that sort of thing. So we'll keep questions to the end, because I don't know this and I'm not sure how to actually see the questions beforehand. So if you have any questions, write them down. If you don't feel comfortable asking them online, feel free to send me an email or whatnot. I will say I can't give any medical advice in this platform. I can't give dosages and things like that. So please be patient about that. Use your judgment, find a naturopath or work with the one that you have, or any sort of functional medicine practitioner that you have available to you. Yeah, so to get started, I thought it would be really interesting to give a talk about the illnesses of our time. A lot of the things that I'm going to be presenting are based on a naturopathic approach. Like Madeline said, I do take Chinese medicine, I do take another system of medicine called anthroposophical medicine and naturopathic medicine and blend them together. And so when I'm looking at a patient, I'm really looking at what kind of pattern is presenting to me. Is this person in a dry state, a hot state, a cold state, a warm state, a wet state, and then trying to support the body to get that body back into balance. So it's less about fighting viruses, bacteria, that sort of thing, and more about how do we make our body such that we're not actually going to become a host to any of these things. And in naturopathic medicine, we call that treating the terrain or supporting the terrain being our body, and then getting ourselves into a healthy state as opposed to an illness state from there. So some questions I wanted to start with that I'm not going to really get into, but I wanted to just have these as seeds for you. It's always a nice time when we are in illness or when we're being presented with an illness, maybe with our friends and family, or the potentiality of an illness, to think about what is illness actually? What is it giving us as a human being? And then what is health? What does health look like? Are we always healthy? As a human being, it's natural not to be 100% healthy. That's part of our our struggle and our relationship to our own bodies and our higher spiritual self is to always have some sort of struggle in our lives, and we're never really at 100%. And I think that's part of the learning of being ill overall. So what is the origin of illness? That's something that, at some conferences I go to, we spend a lot of time thinking about this and discussing this. Does it happen in the mind? Does it happen in the soul? Did it happen in a previous lifetime, perhaps? Or is it something that, everyone's catching? What is an illness? And maybe something more relevant to our time, is there a deeper meaning to a global pandemic for the coevolution of us and the planet? I would also argue that maybe animals, plants, minerals as well. What makes one susceptible to an illness? And is all illness bad? Or is there something also positive or good to an illness? One can argue that there's even examples, biblical examples in Luke actually, of 3 different kinds of illness. There's one where the illness actually brings a realization to the person or to the patient, so it's an individual learning. There's also an example of the family members or the immediate people around that person learning something about themselves or about illness with respect to someone else's illness. And then it also can be healing to a community or to a group of people overall. And so we can look at a lot of ways that our society has shifted with a greater incidence of folks on the autism spectrum and with increased autoimmune disorders and that sort of thing. And I think, the fact that we're actually practicing physical distancing is showing that we are learning something right now. How can we be physically distancing and also trying to connect and be in community with each other and not fear each other, but actually exude more love towards each other? What are the processes involved in illness, and how are these processes bringing us back to health? When we are ill, we end up with things like fever and diarrhea and a nasty cough and that sort of thing. And all those things kind of suck and they feel really bad, but these are really the body trying to get us back into our normal state. And so by doing things like taking Tylenol and Imodium, stuff like that, we're actually halting processes that are a part of a healing. And that's not really the illness, that's part of the body trying to bring itself back to health. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then what I'm really going to focus on in this presentation is how do we build resilience naturally, and how do we support ourselves during illness? So a little bit of Immunology 101, and a lot of this is coming from a lot of questions that I'm getting from people in my community and a lot of patient questions that I've been having. Even though I haven't been seeing patients in my office regularly, I'm still feeling very full and inundated with emails and phone calls and that sort of thing with respect to what's going on here. So I am going to just basically go over the immune system just a little bit. It's extremely complicated. We learn more about it all the time, and I think this virus is actually teaching us a lot about it as well. But typically what happens when we're exposed to something, and I'm calling it a virus here, but it can be a bacteria, something else. A lot of what I'm presenting today is, inspired by the fact that we have this SARS-CoV-19 floating around with us right now. I will say that a lot of the research obviously hasn't been done on SARS-CoV, but more on other viruses, bacteria, and stuff like that. So while we can't really say that these herbs kill these things or that there is a cure or a treatment, we can say that in the past, these things have helped us get to healing when we've been ill with these organisms or processes. So I just wanted to let you know as well that there are no cures and there are no treatments that I'm going to talk about today, but just more suggestions and not going into dosing and whatnot. So back to the immune system. So we get presented with a virus. So you've caught it however you caught it. Usually in the case of COVID, it's with respiratory droplets or some sort of mucosal tissue, some sort of wet contact. So the virus gets into our system, and what happens is the innate immune system gets kicked in. So there's two parts of the immune system. The innate one gets kicked in, and this is one that we're born with. So everyone has this, and what happens is this is the front line of response to an external pathogen. So the virus will come into the cells. These guys will all recognize it. I usually call them our army or our immune system fighters, that sort of thing. So we have a whole bunch of different cells that do different things. So they're going to come try and clean up, kill those cells that the virus is attached to. And then they also send out little signal molecules over to these other cells that are part of our adaptive immune response or our adaptive immune system. The adaptive immune system is one that grows with us over time. So these adaptive immune systems are different in all of us because we've all been exposed to different things. So someone that grew up in Toronto in the city is going to have a very different adaptive immune response to someone that grew up here in Bancroft on a farm, for instance. We're just exposed to different kinds of bacteria, virus, animals, smog. All of those things are really dictating how the adaptive immune response grows and evolves over time. So what happens is the virus comes in, the innate response gets kicked in, and then that also kicks in an adaptive immune response. And once that happens, B cells and T cells get in line. B cells will start to notice this virus and start to make antibodies to it. This is where this antibody thing comes in. And then the other cells, the T cells, those are the ones that are going to be helping to fight this virus and also to start making cells to help other different kinds of cells to fight these cells that are infected by the virus. It gets pretty complicated. I'm trying to keep it as minimal as possible. But what's happening potentially that's causing a lot of issues with certain individuals here is that the adaptive immune response isn't so great, or it's not in the right mode. There's different modes to this adaptive immune response, and it's staying in this like inflammatory, like allergic. If you have allergies or food sensitivities, you know what it's like to have those issues. That adaptive immune response is kind of stuck in that mode. So we kind of need to help get the body into a more what's called Treg system or T helper system, and I have that down under the health outcome there. So we want to dampen that inflammatory response and upregulate these Tregs and T helpers to basically help the adaptive immune response to calm down the innate immune response. What's happening in the COV patients is they're having an extremely aggressive and innate immune response and not so much the right adaptive immune response. So that's what we're going to talk about here. With the COVID-19, I will say that from what we see now, most people do recover. There's some people that actually get it and don't even know they have symptoms. Some people have mild symptoms and it goes into, people that actually need to have respiratory assistance. I know there's different theories floating around about what's going on, and people are starting, as the virus evolves over time and as we start to have more time to research and know a little bit more about this, more and more things are coming to the table. So up until a couple of days ago, it seemed like this ARDS or acute respiratory distress syndrome seemed to be a big problem, where a lot of people are having a drop in their oxygen saturation rate, and a lot of the theory around that was that we were having this really innate immune response happening there. I think that's still the case, but we are also seeing a little bit of research saying that maybe there's something that's attacking the hemoglobin molecule in the red blood cell and releasing a lot of iron and changing the state of iron to being one that's a little bit more reactive with the rest of the body, which is also causing more inflammation. So at the end of the day, it's a lot of inflammation. We're going to try and do our best to quell that inflammation. So what we're doing with this physical distancing is assuming that all of us are going to have this horrible ARDS response. It's not the case that that's going to happen, but we want to make sure that everyone is protected in that way. So how can I support health? What we want to do is prevent that cytokine inflammatory response and support the immune system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about nutrition, definitely our fruits and vegetables. What naturopath wouldn't talk about that? Less protein during illness, and honey, obviously, with the beekeeping here. We're going to talk about detoxification a little bit, and we're going to talk about some remedies. I'm going to talk about some vitamins and minerals and some botanicals. And I am going to speak about anxiety and depression a little bit too. So nutrition, a healthy gut increases our Tregs. So for a lot of us, we've been eating really well and doing a good job of that for ages and ages. And so what that's doing is preventing overall inflammation in the gut. which can help with this inflammatory response as a response to an organism. So arguably all nutrition and all wellness and all health starts with the gut. So what we do know is that fruits and vegetables, if we want to get really scientific and biomedical about it, have a lot of flavonoids in there, and they help to reduce inflammation overall. So the recommendation during this time, even though it's really difficult to get to the grocery store as often as we'd like to, and then when you do go, you have to stand in line and whatnot, it is important to get these in, and having 7 to 10 daily. That sounds kind of intense, but when you think about adding something to your breakfast, whether it's some kale or some fruits and stuff like that, having a big salad at lunch, and then having a couple of veggies at dinner time, and then snacking on some fruits, you pretty much nailed it. So getting those flavonoids in can help reduce that inflammatory response. It also helps to heal leaky gut. I'm sure you guys have all heard about leaky gut by this point. And if we have a leaky gut, we have more undigested food basically getting into the bloodstream, and then the immune system looks at that undigested food and says, hey, that's not me, that's not appropriate, and starts to have a response to that. So that's what's increasing inflammation overall. So if you are a patient of mine and you're listening, you'll say, yeah, I know Dr. Sandy's always talking about this anti-inflammatory diet, but it's actually pretty critical to like keep the cells of our whole gut totally healthy and able to absorb the minerals and the nutrients that we need from our food, and to prevent complexes and molecules getting into the bloodstream that can further exacerbate inflammation overall. So the bottom line to all of this is just reducing inflammation, and that's pretty much the answer to like all issues for the most part. Mm-hmm. So as we're moving into springtime, like I said earlier, and it snowed this morning, and now we're getting into the sunny time. We're kind of in this push and pull between winter and spring right now. And in Chinese medicine, we always are really in alignment with the seasons, and in anthroposophic medicine, we're also really in alignment with the moon calendar. Some people who are gardeners also garden by what's called the biodynamic approach, and so we're always looking at all of the different planets and their influences on plant growth and what's going on in the body and whatnot. So we're moving into springtime. I would say probably in the next couple of weeks we're going to start to see dandelions on our lawns, at least up here in Bancroft. And that's basically telling us what we need to be eating right now. So in winter, we really emphasize doing soups and stews, and people in February were still telling me that they were eating lots of carbs like they did at Christmas, and they couldn't get off the Christmas train. Having those heavy carb-filled foods, more rich, oily stuff is something that is appropriate in winter to help keep us warm. We need that for our energy. But as we're moving into springtime, now's a good time to start having more bitters. And I will say, if you are into foraging and you aren't, spraying your lawn with synthetic fertilizers and chemicals and things like that, you are able to go out and find some dandelion greens. So you can have the serrated greens that are coming out, or the leaves that are coming out from the bottom of this plant. And if you look for these plants in moist areas, like around ponds and streams and in wet or low-lying areas of your yard, those bitters won't be as bitter because they'll actually have a little bit more water in them. And you'll notice that the leaves are actually more rounded. That rounded quality is coming from the extra water that we see. One other cool thing about dandelion I'll add in right now is that it's the only plant that actually has its flower, starts its flower under the soil and then pushes that flower out and then expresses out top. It's the only one. The rest of the plants grow and then they make their flower at the end of their stalk growing. So it's pretty interesting, and we can kind of consider the dandelion that inner sun. So you're starting to feel a little bit down about the weather, about what's going on. You can just think like, okay, there's all these little suns underneath the soil right now. So be ready to start seeing those come up. Another important aspect here is bringing in more smoothies, cooler foods as the temperatures warm up. In Chinese medicine, again, we are using more of the wet foods in the summertime, and I think we all naturally tend towards those anyway, more cucumbers, melons, that sort of thing. I tell people not to do a whole lot of smoothies in the winter because it's actually quite cold and quite damp, and winter tends to be cold and damp. And so if we already are in that environment and we're bringing that in more more, that can be difficult for our inner fire, our digestive fire, to overcome. So now that it's starting to warm up outside, we're able to tolerate that a little bit better. And then we'll talk about fibers again in the next slide. One thing that can be difficult for folks is avoiding the dairy and sugar. Dairy and sugar, from what I'm seeing clinically, are actually pretty inflammatory. And we do also know that folks who have sugar dysregulation or diabetes are not faring as well with this virus that's currently in the atmosphere. We also want to avoid excess sugars and proteins because they cause more phlegm. This condition's been hitting the lower respiratory system, but it's also affecting the upper respiratory system. This is also a time where we are getting regular colds and flus and actually allergies too. So this is a great time of year to just nix that for a little while. And people tend to feel clearer headed. They tend to drain their sinuses a little bit better and whatnot. In Chinese medicine, they don't do a lot of dairy at all. It's discouraged, especially ice cream. There's kind of a joke that, North Americans are really into their ice cream, but it's like cold, damp, phlegmy, super sweet. It's very hard to overcome and super hard on the digestive system. So keeping that out would be very helpful right now. I know those are really big comfort foods and they're very difficult for people to let go of. But, I usually say do 3 weeks. It's not the end of the world. And at the end, you'll see what you've overcome. Another thing I wanted to bring up, because this is a question I get a lot of, is, hey, I don't think I'm lactose intolerant, or can I have the lactose milk, or can I have the goat's cheese and whatnot? There's two components of dairy that I think are kind of an issue with individuals. Sometimes it's the sugar, which is the lactose, and in other times it's the casein, or the protein. So we have a protein issue and a sugar issue that seems to be exacerbated in humans with eating dairy. Now, I'm not an anti-dairy person. I grew up on a dairy farm actually here in Maynooth, and we had dairy right from the cows every day until I was 13, and we sold the herd. And all of us, from my grandfather to my younger brother, as soon as we sold the herd and started eating or consuming store-bought milk products, we all ended up with some sort of allergy or sensitivity or whatever to dairy. So unfortunately in Canada, we're not able to get raw milk that easily. I'm not, saying that dairy is evil. It's just the way that we're getting dairy in our diet right now is not very good. And I would also argue that having a plant-based diet overall is healthier. I know that doesn't work for everybody. I have seen people that need to have that meat for various reasons. I won't get into that right now, but avoiding dairy and sugar. And then some other supportive foods. If we're going to take a food out, we better bring one in. And honey is always a winner for me. Natural honey. If you can get propolis or honey that actually has the bee pollen in it, there's a couple in Killaloe, Ontario that sell it with the pollen in it, and I'm just totally in love with it right now. And it's really good for people with allergies, seasonal allergies to stuff around here. The propolis is actually antiviral and antibacterial. Like the bees will surround their hives in this stuff. It's a reddish stuff that you can tincture in alcohol and you can start to take it internally. We have been looking at the properties of propolis for antiviral research in HIV and AIDS actually. So I have been using it very successfully with patients who have herpes simplex or cold sores. Putting that on there and actually taking it internally has been very helpful. So there is a really strong antiviral aspect to honey. Make sure that when you do get it in the grocery store that it actually is real. I would try my best to get it not in the grocery store, but somewhere actually more reputable, because you know how it is with labeling now. They make it sound like it's natural, but it's actually the name of something. It's very confusing. So get it from a local source if you can. And then when we are ill, it's really important to minimize protein. And I will talk about protein again later, but especially when we're ill, a lot of these illnesses, viral load, bacterial load, all of the toxins that are coming out of these things, all of the cells that are getting blown up in this, immune fight are actually proteins, or can end up as proteins. And so your body's really dealing with this excess protein load and trying to fight off viruses. So if you can minimize the protein consumption and, definitely go plant-based if you are going to do protein during an illness period, that would be the best way to go. And we just don't want to burden our system. And then some other supportive foods that you probably all know about are turmeric. onions, peppers, leafy greens, quercetin, and green tea, just to talk about those a little bit more. People get confused about this a lot, so I'm going to just pinpoint this out a bit. Curcumin is actually the active ingredient in turmeric, and it downregulates inflammation. And then quercetin can also inhibit inflammation, and some specific things are involved in this inflammasome that we're talking about with this COVID right now. And it prevents the virus's ability to actually get into cells, which is pretty interesting. And then green tea has this component called EGCG, or epigallocatechin gallate, that can help with reducing inflammation, and we actually see it cause cell apoptosis, or kill cells that are actually carcinogenic and stuff like that. So we have used it in oncological support too for patients. I will say that playing around with the curcumin can actually be dangerous if we are on blood thinners and stuff like that. So don't play too much with that in terms of medical grade if you are on any sort of cardiovascular support at this time. And it is better uptaken with black pepper. The stuff in our cupboards, I just learned something the other day about the freshness of turmeric, and the stuff that's in our cupboards should only stay in our cupboards for 6 weeks for it to actually be effective as food. So probably not the case in most people's cupboards that it's in there for that long. So getting the fresh stuff as much as possible. It is kind of hard to find that in some places. So detox. So detox, we talk about, I hear it often like, hey, I'm gonna, eat maple syrup and turmeric for a week and nothing else. That can be, I guess, a detox. It's not a very safe detox, in my opinion. I do want to talk a little bit about that. There is a difference between a detox and a cleanse. A cleanse is basically helping to clear things out of the colon or out of the large intestine, and detoxing is actually supporting the liver that is always doing detoxing. So detoxing isn't just something you do in the spring. The liver is always doing it. Everything that happens in our body or everything that's floating around in our body gets detoxed by the liver, and there's 2 pathways that do that in the liver. So by supporting the liver, we're helping that detox pathway. So if we are exposed to an illness or exposed to an increased toxin load, or just feel really stuck and feel really heavy and brain fog and that sort of thing, really supporting the liver can help with those phase 1 and 2 pathways. So this is something that's going on all the time. It detoxes our hormones, our neurotransmitters, all of the foods that we eat. All of this is going through all of these pathways. So how do we support them? Again, going back to those bitters, a lot of those herbs, dandelion, artichoke, chicory, thistle, and then some of these teas, the dandelion and milk thistle tea that is really easy to find in the grocery stores, can really help with those phase 1, 2 pathways overall to get those going. The liver also requires a lot of sulfur to help detox a lot of these compounds. So more brassicas in the diet. That's your kale, broccoli, anything that has a bit of that stink when you're cooking it in the kitchen, that sulfury smell. Those are awesome for detox. So increasing as much of those as possible right now can be very helpful too. Sweating, moving till you sweat. Now, there has been a little bit of like, should I go outside? Am I going to catch COVID outside? No, not really. I just listened to the president of the New York Naturopathic Association talk yesterday about how, we really should be outside. We really should be exercising. There's no COVID cloud that's following us around and like, toxic plume that's going to come and get us. So getting outside is really important. Moving till you sweat. I usually tell people to exercise until you can't really have a conversation with someone else. So it doesn't mean you have to have a conversation with someone else, just moving until you wouldn't be able to have a conversation with someone else means that you're actually getting your heart rate up enough. And you're probably going to start sweating at that point. So that's a really good indication of good health and fitness there. So, and doing that for at least 15, 30 minutes a day. Most of us aren't able to work at full capacity right now, so it's a great time for us to start building these habits. If you have a personal sauna, that's a great time to sweat. Obviously, the public ones aren't available, but in the future when things start opening up again, sauning is a great way to get into this sweating mode, and then bringing ourselves into having more water overall. In Chinese medicine, we talk about these patterns. It seems that there's this dry cough pattern with this virus. Typically, a lot of these things are really wet and exudative, which usually has a lot of mucus that people can't really expectorate or get out. Water is really great because it moistens the dry system and it thins the thick system. So I always am a great fan of water, at least 1 to 2 liters daily. Grab a quart jar if you don't have one or whatever. I find people don't do really well with just glasses in their house because they don't know how many they've done. They're not committed to it. So get committed to buying yourself like a 1 liter water bottle or finding a jar in your pantry and filling that with water and saying, okay, by noon, one of those is going to be gone. And then by 4 o'clock, a second one's going to be gone. And then everything else is great after that. And it doesn't have to be totally just water. Coffee doesn't count. Caffeinated drinks don't count. I get that question a lot. But you can, make some nettle tea or your dandelion or milk thistle tea and throw that in and cool it down and just drink that cool. Linden tea. Linden is Tilia. It's a very relaxing herb overall, or yarrow. These are both diaphoretics, which mean they promote sweating. So these are something else that you can bring in. Another way that we detox is through bowel movements. A lot of times when we're ill, we actually are constipated as well, which is a problem because we need to really get those toxins and exotoxins out of our system. So having more soluble fiber and insoluble fiber is really helpful. So the soluble stuff is the stuff that attracts the water and creates a gel in the colon. Psyllium is a big one, oat bran, barley, nuts. People who are gluten-free need to be a little bit careful with the oat bran and the barley, but the nuts, seeds, beans, lentils, peas, that sort of thing. Fruits and veggies are really great. Vegetables and whole grains are super helpful too, to just add bulk to get the peristalsis to move that stuff out of the system. But I will say, don't go out and just buy a bunch of psyllium and take it without hydrating way more than 1 to 2 liters a day. It can actually cause something kind of akin to concrete in there and cause further exacerbation of constipation. So when we're ill, we want an extra bowel movement a day, and usually water and the fiber can help with that. And if not, you have to kind of go to extra measures. But I've also seen a lot of, when there's too much phlegm and fluid and metabolism up here and not enough fluid down in the colon area, is when we start to see constipation. So usually the treatment to any sort of head congestion is to having extra bowel movements a day too. So getting on to remedies, I've broken them up into different different times. I have a time scale here. So again, I'm just going to say contacting a naturopathic doctor to get a better idea of doses is probably a good idea. We can't really play around with this without really knowing where anyone's at with this. So some of you already know some of these things. Some of you may be already on these things. And we just want to make sure that, you're not on any sort of pharmaceutical medication or any other herbs and stuff that can counteract or even stop the ability for them to work with each other. So I have this prevention phase, which is in green here. We usually will do vitamin D, cod liver oil, which has vitamins A and D in it, and a multivitamin. So that's just your general day-to-day. This is what I'm doing for my daily life. I say multivitamins. I'm not a big supplement pusher, but just especially in the winter, we don't have really high quality food coming up here to Canada compared to California. So getting on a little bit more vitamins is helpful to help with the nutritional content there and the mineral content. Vitamin D, I will say it's kind of crazy to me that we don't test for this, that this is not covered for testing in the province of Ontario, because there is actually a relationship between COVID severity in patients that are vitamin D deficient. And that's true also with the flu and other things that I see too. So that's one thing that I will regularly test in my practice. It costs $40. You can ask your MD to do it and just pay the money. It's worth it. Most people who think they're okay, even dosing at 1,000 IUs a day, are not getting enough and are still deficient. And even if you're, I have some farmers, I have some construction workers and whatnot in my practice, and, they spend a lot of time outside and they're still deficient too. So I want to really hit that one home. And we really increase that when someone's getting ill. So that's prevention. Exposure, we're still going to keep that vitamin D and cod liver oil in. So if you think you were exposed to COVID, but you're not sure, you're around someone who is symptomatic, you would want to start to bring in a low dose vitamin C, or, it's also called ascorbic acid. bringing in zinc. You can get that in foods, oysters, pumpkin seeds, and whole grains. And then, you know, starting to bring on some herbs. Some of our friends, astragalus, echinacea, elderberry, another name for that is sambucus. Bringing those in to help with preventing viral load. And then when we become symptomatic, things that we want to do is continuing with the D, changing the dose, doing hourly vitamin C, upping our game on zinc, and then upping our game on the herbs as well. And then usually we will bring in specific treatments for the symptoms. You know, if you have a fever, what are we going to do for that? Head cold, that sort of thing. So getting more into those herbs that I talked about on the other slide, some of the properties of these plants I have here too, just so we have an idea of how they're working. Elderberry grows on a tree. I have one in my yard and I haven't been able to pick the berries because the birds tend to get to it before I do. So this year I have to set up something else because I've missed them for the last couple of years. But basically elderberry is cooling heat. And what is our immune system when it's overworked? It's basically hot, it's inflamed, lots of things are going on. So we want to try and cool heat. Elderberry is a great plant for that. It's also a diaphoretic, you know, doing that whole sweating thing. It's a mucolytic, which helps bring mucus out. And it's also antiviral. It's a great herb because it also supports stress and insomnia, which is also happening during this time as well. Echinacea is a pretty standard immunomodulator. I'm sure everyone has seen it. It's a beautiful plant. It's got this warm pink gesture that's going into this purple, kind of telling us that it can pull something that's hot into something that's cooler. It changes, it regulates the macrophage activity, so it's regulating that inflammation piece, reduces excessive metabolism, and then it mediates between that innate and adaptive immunity where people are getting hung up on. So it's a really good one. I usually will prescribe this when there is kind of a cold season going on. It's arguably not as effective during a cold, but a little bit more effective before one starts happening. So kind of priming up that immune system there, and it's also anti-inflammatory. And then turmeric, I've got the root here, not the plant, just an image of the root, which has a lot of color down in the root. It's very interesting to see the gestures of the plants. From looking at plants and looking at the gesture or how it's different from other plants, we can start to see what the healing properties are. The more a plant strays from a typical looking plant, the more we can understand and see what it's had to overcome in nature and how that might be able to be something that can help us in our own bodies. So turmeric's amazing. As you can see, it clears heat. It also invigorates blood. So if there is something going on with this whole hemoglobin system, it might be able to support that as well. And it downregulates all these different things. These are these TNF, TF, kappa beta, COX-2, lipooxygenase. These are all things that help to ramp up inflammation overall. So it's helping to calm that down. So these are all great. They're pretty ubiquitous out there in the health food stores and whatnot. And hopefully you guys have at least run into the elderberry and echinacea in nature. Turmeric, I've only seen it growing in India. I haven't seen it growing in Bancroft, especially right now. So I also wanted to pay some heed to astragalus, which in Chinese medicine and in Western medicine is kind of the king of the immune system, particularly right now. It is in one of the formulas that I use quite regularly, called Deep Immune. So I usually prescribe that to a lot of folks because it's helping that kidney-lung relationship that we talk about in Chinese medicine. If the kidney's weak and not able to like build the fire to help support the lung up above it, then there's not going to be this really great system between the two of them. So astragalus helps to regulate the two of them there. It's considered an adaptogen. So many people have heard about adrenals. Everyone's adrenals are probably going through the roof right now with, you know, the whole socioeconomic health stuff going on. So I like to include this just for that as well, for the tonifying of the adrenals. So the adrenals are these little glands that look like little pyramids that sit on top of our kidneys, and they're responsible for our stress hormones, our sex hormones, and for regulating blood pressure and regulating our salts in our body. So they're really important, and we want to really support them at this time. So astragalus is also very helpful here. It is indicated for shortness of breath, spontaneous sweating, frequent colds. It helps to bring this downward flow of fluids, and it's also an immunomodulator. It's actually pretty beautiful. I think another name for it is batch. So to look at symptoms that might occur at this time and any other time, you can see we basically have this amazing herb garden in front of us. So we have lots of options from the plant world. Um, I would also say we have lots of support from the mineral world too. A lot of those are in homeopathic dilutions, and I'm going to save that for another talk because homeopathics I find are really touchy with some other naturopathic practitioners, and actually some people, and people don't find it very scientific and whatnot. But I'm totally game on, and I see it work very effectively in my practice. So I haven't really talked about that much here, but it is super helpful and very, very much indicated here. So, and some of these you can find in homeopathic form as well. But for cough, we have, the horehound, which is this guy, if you can see my pointer, and the inula, thyme, the mullein, the osha. For fever, we got things like pleurisy root, which is this beautiful red flower, and the eupatorium, which is similar in gesture but purple. And then body pain, arnica, most of you have heard of, pleurisy root again, and then boswellia, which is actually frankincense. It isn't actually the plant that we're using, but the resin, which is a lot of warmth concretized in this resin overall. And for sore throat, we tend to use this plant called inula, or elecampane is another name for it, and mallow and licorice. So this is not the stuff that you get in the candy aisle at the grocery store. It's actually plants, and we use the roots of them. Mallow is really beautiful and really slippery and really mucilaginous. And then for diarrhea, we can use ginger and applesauce overall. One other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is this website that we have. A mentor of mine created this, and then she's passed it on to me as she's kind of heading her way into retirement and focusing on other things in California. It's a website called Sophia Michael Remedies, and it's a free online resource for at-home ways to support your own health. So if you go to this website, which is Sophia MR, you can go to symptoms and treatments, and from there you can find all sorts of little tidbits on how to help with an ear infection, to sun care, to sore throat and that sort of thing. So I'm going to give you this as a gift as well. And then here we also have some videos that we put together on how to do things for sinus congestion, ear pain, and for fever. Actually, last night I had a mother call and say, my daughter had an ear infection a few weeks ago. We did antibiotics, and now it's come back, and we don't want to take her to the ER. What do we do? And I said, okay, we gave her a bunch of things. I said, really do this ear onion compress and watch this movie. And she's 5. She may not want to smell like stinky onion, but I just got an email about an hour ago saying that she woke up, she did the ear onion compress, she woke up, she's no longer in pain, she no longer has swelling, and she's doing really good right now. So they work very well. So the lemon calf wraps for fever, don't be afraid of fever. Fever is actually part of that system to help get us back into health. We can do things like tepid baths, lemon calf wraps, that sort of thing to help reduce that fever without going to Tylenol or ibuprofen. We also don't want to be using things like ibuprofen at this time because there's still some mixed and conflicting data on how that's reacting or influencing the ACE a part of the kidney system, basically. So just stay clear of those. If you're going to go to anything, go to Tylenol, although that's not really awesome either because it's really hard on the liver. So at least for fever, try and get it down in another way. Once it gets over 102, 3, 4, that's when we start to get a little bit more concerned, but you can let yourself get a little bit warmer. Also bundle up and allow yourself to actually flush it out and use some of these herbs to actually get it out. Ginger kidney compress, I just mentioned that there too, because with the adrenal fatigue and the anxiety and stuff like that, it's actually a nice self-help treatment to do, especially when we can't go get massage, acupuncture, and things like that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about anxiety and fear because I'm seeing a lot of anxiety and fear, and I'm also going to talk about depression as well. I don't know if anyone can recognize this watercolor of this plant, but it's actually lemon balm or melissa. It does grow up here in this northern region, but that's a really nice herb to help with anxiety, and I think you can get it at the grocery store in the tea aisle. So what is anxiety? It's a thinking experience. We can think ourselves into an anxiety. It's a state of self-consciousness. It's something that that happens to us when we feel that our security is endangered. And I think for a lot of us, we feel that way. You know, are we going to catch this? Are other people going to get it? Am I going to be able to look after myself financially? You know, am I going to be able to work again? All these things. I think a lot of us feel that we were cruising along and here the whole world's gotten stopped. So it's very normal to feel anxiety right now. And we feel like we need to do something about it. And our minds are always active trying to figure out solutions. We have this pent up energy. It's usually up in here, and a lot of people feel anxious up here. So there's increased palpitations, there's more sweating, there's more nervousness, tremor, that sort of thing. And the way that we work with anxiety is to try and get it into concrete fears. So one would argue that maybe anxiety is like this diffuse cloud of fears that haven't really come down into like crystallized thoughts. So that mind spinning, that mouse racing on the wheel hasn't really come to a halt yet. So what we want to do, and I'll talk about this in a little second, is really trying to get those runaway thoughts into concretized fears, and we can actually work with those. Fear has a lot of negativity around it, but it's actually quite healthy, and it shows you what you need to do to protect yourself in your life. You know, by being fearful of something, you're protecting yourself, you're giving yourself time to learn about that thing before knowing whether you should proceed towards it or turn away from it. And so finding a strategy to cope with that fear is part of naming what it is, actually, and it can be really difficult to figure out what that is. And I wanted to talk about depression a little bit too, because depression is something where people will actually get stuck in the present and the past and don't feel like they have any future. And I think for a lot of people, you know, most of us, we have to just live day by day now, and we're not used to that. You know, we're really good at having goals, projections. You know, we're going to have festivals and birthdays and weddings and things like that, and right now all of that's up in the air. Like my brother is supposed to get married in August, and his fiance is in Ohio and he's in Canada, and like they can't see each other, they don't know when. You know, it's very hard for a lot of people in various ways. But yeah, depression is usually a feeling experience, so it's not so much a thinking experience like anxiety is, but it's something that we feel in our soul. And we usually feel that the future is a burden that we can't cope with. And when that happens, we end up having more doubt, mistrust, self-protection. You know, if we start to see people, you know, by knowing these things, we can actually observe, you know, people in the community and understand where people are at, because we'll all be on different parts of the spectrum with these emotions too. And the view of the self goes inward rather than outward. So instead of looking out for your homies and your people, you're really going inward and going, well, it's me against the world, or it's them against me. And with depression, we want to really open that person up and realize like not everything is something that's like demanding something of them, but actually something that can actually bring love or some other quality to them. It is sometimes difficult to work with depressed folks in terms of talk therapy because it's a feeling. Sometimes talking about it doesn't actually access the soul, so doing other therapies can actually be helpful. It's not really accessible by logic, and some of the treatment with depression is actually creating positive experiences to compensate for those experiences that are causing depression. And this is a picture of St. John's wort here under this woman in the cloud. But a quote that I actually find quite lovely is, "It is healing if the human soul finds its reflection in the community." And at this point, we have to dig a little bit to find our reflection in the community, because we're not able to be in community in the same way right now. And I think we're starting to see it. It's really cool. So some supportive ideas for anxiety and depression. We'll start with anxiety here. Is using facts to support reality. So, you know, if you find yourself spinning, write that stuff down. You know, a lot of people suggest journaling. I think it's amazing. Get that stuff down on paper or email it to yourself or however you journal. And then start to look at that stuff. See what the themes are. See what you can really break that down. Like behind some of that anxiety, is it just like, is it a fear of death? Have you really thought much about death before? What would it be like to die? Are you fearing people leaving you, abandoning you? Are you fearing your financials, that sort of stuff? So, you know, getting down to what that is as opposed to just spinning around, walking around your house, spinning out. be helpful. Really taking your mental energy and starting to study something new, guitar, art, clay, these sorts of things. Complete some old projects that you haven't been working on. I've been working on this shawl in my knitting collection I've been working on since 2017. So trying to get that one done. And then limiting our exposures to media and toxic information. Checking in with the media maybe once or twice a day, and not holding all of your conversations with everybody around COVID, but really talking about your garden planning or things that are of interest to you or whatever can actually help to get you out of this anxious state. And then I have the picture of lemon balm here again. And eating well is really important too. It's really difficult to eat well. A lot of people are stress eating and whatnot. And then Easter's coming up, so there's lots more garbage in the grocery stores in terms of chocolate and stuff. So getting into the rhythm of eating, I do notice that a lot of my patients in practice that come to me with anxiety, we just have to balance the blood sugar. So that sometimes people will not eat breakfast, eat a big dinner, or like snack on power bars all day or whatever, and like just are totally anxious. What we do is get them eating a piece of protein every 90 minutes. This is where we're going into the protein piece. What that does is helps to stabilize the blood sugar. So if you're having a lot of stress, you're releasing a lot of adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, that's making your insulin and blood sugar levels go nutso. So by having a little bit of protein, at least every 90 minutes, we can help stabilize that biochemically. And so your feelings of anxiety may be able to calm down a little bit. I'm not saying you have to eat tons of meals. This can be like 3 or 4 nuts. It can be a couple bites of a meat stick or a piece of egg, or some nuts and seeds, some nut butter with some apple or something like that as well, some hummus, something like that would be helpful. And then regular sleep. There is some research saying that melatonin is very helpful at combating COVID. I'm not a huge fan of prescribing that or using that, because it definitely prevents the pituitary or the pineal gland up in our brain from making it on its own. So we don't want to get addicted to that, but just go to bed. Read some nice books before going to bed, get into a nice ritual before going to sleep, and then waking up regularly at the same time. Walking, cycling, other rhythmical movements, paddling, whatever you got available to you. And then depression, depression can be tricky. Not taking things personally, that's a big one. Again, that's the whole like me versus the world thing. Be more objective about life and do not project emotions into things. So things happen, we can always feel like it's happening to us, but realize like, okay, there's some other reason for it to happen, and it just is happening, and let it go. Just allowing those things to go and meeting the future a little bit more with ease is helpful in depression. Depressive types tend to have an issue with carbohydrate and sugar metabolism. So bitters are definitely helpful in easing that stagnation and to help with the sugars and carbs, reduce those. And then, soul nourishment, beautiful things, art, creativity, sunlight, more time in nature. I went and bought some Gerbera daisies today because I thought, it's Easter. I just want my house to look more bright and colorful, and I'm going to give some to my grandma on the way home. I'm going to drop it at her doorstep and then head on my way. But bringing in more art, changing up the art on your walls, getting creative with yourself, dressing up every day, doing these sorts of things can help you feel better. And then movement. Depressed folks tend to have, like in Chinese medicine, we talk about depression being a sluggish liver. And the liver is basically in charge of like moving forward in life, and responsible for our limbs. So being able to use our limbs. So walking, a nice power walk pose, getting involved with that. If you've got any wood to pile right now or any sort of yard work, raking, all of that's coming into play right now, get on that. Using your limbs is really important with helping with the depression piece, especially in the evening, getting up from the table and going for a walk. It's nice until whatever, after 8 now. That would be very helpful and go a long way as well. I also wanted to share some meditations. I actually carry the fear and anxiety one in my wallet, and I will pull it out wherever if I'm having a tricky time with something or whatever. But I think these are really indicated in our time, and I'm just going to read them here as well. So I bear calm within myself. I bear within myself the forces which strengthen me. I want to fill myself with the warmth of these forces. I want to pervade myself with the power of my will. And I want to feel how calm spreads through all of my being when I strengthen myself to find calm as the force within me. And the other one. We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards man out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to everything that may come, and we must only think that whatever comes is given to us by a world directive full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely, to live out of pure trust without any security in existence. Trust in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Truly, nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. And let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and every evening. And that's it. So I've got information here. If you want to get in touch with me, there you go. On my website, Foundation Stone Medicine, there's a tab called resources. So those compresses videos are all there. They're free. I also did a plant meditation last week, and the video's up there on YouTube. And Sophia Michael Remedies is there. And then if you guys need supplements and vitamins and stuff, there's an online portal there that I've shared to the public. So I know it's hard to get some of the good stuff now. So if you guys need some help with that, go ahead. Anyway, that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
It's Susan.
Hi, Susan.
I have a question regarding lentils and inflammation. On the one hand, you're always reading that pulses are great, but I've also heard that anybody who's suffered from gout or other inflammatory conditions should avoid lentils. Can you give me your perspective on lentils in diet?
Sure. So a lot of our ability to absorb some of those family of grains depends on how we're preparing them. So as long as they're prepared, soaked overnight and whatnot, then we're able to really crack those outer shells of those grains and allow ourselves to be able to digest them a little bit better. So we could try that for easier digestion. In terms of increasing inflammation, that can happen for some people and not for others. So it's really specific. I can't really say that there's any blanket term with lentils. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay.
Sandy, someone is asking, what do you recommend for a vitamin D dose?
Ooh, I knew this was going to come up. And I say it like that because in Ontario, I'm only allowed to prescribe 1,000 IU daily. When I was practicing in Oregon, I was prescribing much higher than that. Legally, I'm not allowed to say anything more than that, but I will say check the literature, read up on the vitamin D hammer, talk to your MD about that. I haven't seen, without getting into any trouble here, I haven't seen in the literature anyone having issues with doing anything around 10,000 for a few days when they're sick, and to bump themselves up. I have prescribed when people have had severe respiratory conditions. In my previous practice, I have done even 50,000 for a couple days a week too. And I've done that personally when I've been sick, but I can't really tell people to do that at this point. I do think that the rules have to be changed around that. And also there is some controversy over whether the vitamin D supplementation that we do is as effective as sunlight. And obviously the sun is the best. I will prescribe women to go out in their bikinis as much as they can in private in the summer to get as much D over their skin, and men too, getting out as much as they can naked without sunscreen and overuse of that. those kinds of materials. And there are some really good alternatives to sunscreen, like layering your clothing. There's a really great website called EWG.org, the environmentalworkinggroup.org, to help you make decisions on what kind of products to use overall. But as a society, yeah, we're pretty D deficient. And yeah, there's more, you know, the African-American groups in the US are actually getting hit with COVID pretty hard. And there is something to suggest that maybe the melanin that's creating the skin darkness is actually preventing vitamin D uptake in the right way. But I can't legally tell you guys to do more than 1,000. I'm sorry.
And thank you for that. And by the way, that was an amazing presentation, very helpful. I took lots of photos and made lots of notes. There's someone who's asking, have you heard that coffee suppresses the immune system? That could be a tricky one.
Yeah.
I want to know the answer to that one.
Yeah, well, coffee's I love coffee, so I'm going to tell you that straight up. I'm probably the naturopath that drinks the most coffee of anyone I know. That's not true. So I usually cut that out in the inflammatory diet, mostly because I prescribe the inflammatory diet when people have reflux or GERD symptoms, and coffee usually tends to be a trigger. I have also noticed that the greasier, darker, oilier beans tend to do better for people. So doing those dark roasts, there's some great ones by Kicking Horse that are available here locally. That company that does a good job of getting those greasy beans. And then, you know, ordering dark roasts as much as you can help that overall, because there's a lot more oils there compared to those dry Ethiopian roasts and whatnot. So in terms of managing symptoms in that way, that's helpful. You know, we actually do use coffee and enemas sometimes to help, you know, bring a lot more glutathione to the liver. It can help with glutathione production in the liver by like 600%. So I don't know what to say about coffee. You know, I think that's all I can say about coffee. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. So it wasn't a no.
It wasn't a no. I mean, you know, I have patients that take like 7 cups before 10 o'clock. Yeah. You know, let's do like some half and half. You know, some people don't like the processing of the decaf. I say, you know, if it's going to be like less intense on your kidneys overall and on your stress levels and on your GERD and stuff like that, then maybe it's worth taking it out a little bit. You know, we're exposed to stuff all the time. It's just a matter of choice and what we're going to go with and what we're okay with and what we're not. Good question.
So, yeah. So we're getting close to, or we're beyond the hour now, but does anyone want to open up their mic and ask a question while we still have Sandy here?
I've got some chat. Oh, okay. Here's a cool one. Jackie's asking, can you explain more about using honey and propolis to treat cold sores and how exactly does it help? Well, okay, so I can't remember the exact mechanism, but the propolis I have seen clinically reduce the length of time of exposure. So say you got your cold sore blisters showing up on day 1. I've actually done some tests clinically to show that doing the typical like polysporin patches versus coconut oil, lysine, propolis, and all that sort of stuff. Propolis and coconut oil can help decrease the exposure time by another week. So typically the cold sores will last for about a week. We're expressing the exudate or that golden colored crusty stuff for probably the first 4 to 6 days, and then the rest is just scabbing and healing. But the propolis can help drop the amount of that pussy phase and then also help to promote healing overall. There's a really good product. I don't like to do this whole product thing, but I will. I'm just gonna grab it here. It's by Quantum. It's called Super Lysine. I don't know if you guys can see it, but they've got it in tincture form and in this form, but there's a lot of propolis in that as well as lysine. So with viruses, and I didn't really talk about this, viruses tend to express themselves when we have more arginine than lysine in the system. So having a lysine supplement, if you're especially subjected to a lot of cold sores is actually quite helpful. Peanuts are a high source of arginine, so nixing them out of the diet can also be helpful. So anything that's antiviral for one thing, you got to think like it's probably going to be antiviral for other things. So, getting on the lysine propolis train can probably be really helpful. So in terms of that honey propolis, having a little bit of honey daily, and then propolis you can use that as a prophylactic, and then when you actually get a lesion you can put it on the lesions. It does create this like red, yellow, weird sticky residue, so if you just want to do it at nighttime or whenever you're at home and not in public, it's probably a little bit more socially okay for you.
There's another question here, a good one from Sandra at the very bottom.
Oh yeah, so you mentioned that astragalus is the king in boosting immunity, and does it come in capsule or food? So astragalus, will eventually start growing up here all over the place, and it grew all over in Oregon where I live down there too. Is it in a capsule? I don't know. I always get tinctures of everything whenever I can, unless someone can't tolerate it, because I find they're more effective. The herbs start working on the tongue. We have a lot of receptors to a lot of the herbs in our mouth. And so by taking tinctures, we're actually getting that direct hit. And if we're not absorbing very well because we have various disease and that sort of thing, when we take capsules, they kind of sit there and like not get digested very well. And sometimes those capsules themselves, there's all sorts of ways of manufacturing them. People don't tolerate them that well. However, some people do have GERD and reflux and stuff to some of the tinctures. So yeah, getting yourself a capsule would be fine. I'm pretty sure it would be fine. Sorry, I'm just reading here at the same time. Okay, yeah, someone's got it in a powder. That's awesome. There we go. There was another.
Glutathione.
Oh, glutathione. So I gotta like write it to spell it. Glutathione. Glutathione. So that's what vitamin C is doing, is basically providing the body with lots of glutathione, and glutathione helps to reduce reactive oxygen species. So that's, there's a lot of research showing that the Chinese use a lot of vitamin C. A lot of the naturopaths are really like, in the US are saying like, wake up medical world, like we're using this and it's really treating a lot of this stuff. What's it's doing really is giving the body a lot of glutathione to be able to reduce a lot of those reactive oxygen species that are causing inflammation. NAC does that as well, something called NAC, and acetylcysteine does that. I give these very regularly to people who have allergies and stuff like that too. So hopefully that helps.
Lots of questions there.
Yeah, right. So 67 and therefore in the higher risk group, what can I do to protect myself? Good question. I think a lot of these things that we've already talked about, the vitamin D, your a low dose vitamin C is probably very helpful. Getting some zinc on board, getting something that's going to cause the glutathione, which is C, or some NAC. What else could you do? Yeah, improving your nutrition, getting lots of water, and then kind of doing that physical distancing thing too overall. But I think, if you have everything that's in these slides, and I think I'm recording this, and if it works out, I'll put it on my YouTube thing, or maybe Madeline is, or whatever. I'll put a link in my resources section. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so I'll put a link to this in the resources section. Then, okay, what can I take that increases iron? In terms of foods, there's different kinds of iron. There's heme iron and non-heme iron. So there's basically animal iron and non-animal iron. And a lot of the leafy greens can provide you with iron, and a lot of the organ meats can provide you with iron as well. Yeah, I think we've got everything. I'm really sorry if we missed one. Yeah, well, thank you everyone for listening, for staying on board. And
so we're getting lots of great comments. This was a great session. Thank you so much. It was incredibly informative. I appreciated how fast you could talk and so clearly. You got a lot of information in, and I hope I think this is, what people need right now. They need that assurance that there's things that they can do to their own immune system. I found that really interesting to know a little bit more about the 2 different immune systems. Didn't know that. That's really quite fascinating.
Yep.
And I think if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to Sandy. Sandy, do you want to type in your website right there?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then the recording, it's not a video recording, it's a voice recording. We were successful in getting a recording for the meditation yesterday, so that's on our website now. And you can either reach out to Sandy or you'll see the recording on our site just for a temporary time. And yeah, if you have any questions, just reach out. She's practicing, she's in her office, she's answering questions and lots of emails. So I'm sure you can book a private session with, you're available for private sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and get the slides out as well. So
yeah, the slides are
oh, and the website, yes. Okay, everyone just email me privately, and I'm going to put that on the thingy now, and I'll try and send out emails and things like that. So
yeah, you can Google Dr. Sandy Musclow.
It's all there. It's all on the resources page. Yeah, it's on Foundation.
Hopefully when we all reopen and can travel, we'll see you again. You're usually there about once a month for a weekend workshop.
Yeah.
At Grail Springs.
Yeah, Thursday nights, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully we see you again at Grail Springs soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sandy. Really appreciated. This was an incredible session, and look forward to seeing you again. Yeah, I see a bravo there from Carrie.
Okay.
And again, hopefully we all see you on Saturday. I really look forward to seeing you on Saturday. For those who are interested in more of the spiritual aspect, like I said, the series is a broad spectrum